Okay, this is Taylor Caby from CardRunners.com. I'm making a sample video for our first Card Player TV content share with Card Player, and I'd like to thank you guys for watching this. I'm just going to give you guys a sample of the types of videos that we offer at CardRunners, and just kind of go through my thought processes on different types of hands. Um, the first thing I do when I'm sitting at a table, especially if I'm playing a higher stakes game, or this would be more of a medium stakes game, is I look around at the competition and I see the stack sizes of other players. Now at this table, we can see that this is a 1-2 no limit table, and the maximum buy-in is $200. Now every single player at this table has over $200 in front of them, so that tells me a few things. First of all, generally the players with more money are the most competent players, because first of all they have more money, so they've probably been winning. Um, Also, if they are playing deeper stacked poker, it takes more skill, and generally players that maybe less skilled or don't have experience playing a lot of the game they're playing will be buying in for a shorter amount. So right away I can see everybody has a big stack, and that's something that I definitely take into consideration. If I was looking for an if I was optimally table selecting, I would probably try to find a table with some players that didn't appear to be as solid regular players. Okay, I've raised first to act with King Ace offsuit. This is obviously a premium hand. Um, Now I'm led into by a player that is just called out of the blinds. Now I actually not before I was on camera, I actually got a chance to look at this player, watch the table playing for a few minutes as I was setting things up, and before I got a seat at the table. This player right here is never folding. He's been shoving all in pre-flop, doing a bunch of crazy things. I'm gonna just call right here to see if I can hit a good card on the turn. I don't think there's any value in me raising him as a bluff, and I think my hand is too good just to open fold right there. He bet a $7 bet into a $14 pot or so. So I have the queen gave me the stone nuts, and a king and an ace would give me a hand that I could feel confident enough to continue. Now he's made a pot-sized bet, and as I said before, this is a player that doesn't seem very likely to fold, hasn't been folding, so I'm not going to try to bluff him right here. Against a solid player, I may try to bluff in this situation, but against a player that I don't think will fold, I will just give up my hand. Now, at a higher stakes table, I'd be more likely to bluff right there because there's a reasonable chance that a player might fold the hand. However, at a table where I see a player that I feel is weaker, that hasn't been folding and has been shoving all in pre-flop with crazy hands and just being very reckless, there's not very much value in bluffing that player. And that's something that we try to teach at Card Runners. You have to know your opponents, and you have to know who you can bluff and who you can't bluff. And if you find a player that you can't bluff, it's just not smart to do so. So basically, I'll go through my strategy when I sit at a table. Like I said, you can see this player right here is being very loose and very aggressive and reckless. So that's something I'm going to take into consideration. So what I'll do is I'll look around at stack sizes to kind of get an idea of how the players are playing. After I can kind of get an idea of what types of players I'm up against, I will. Okay, this player has raised it to 4. I'm going to re-raise because first of all I have position right here. I have position, and I have what figures to be a better hand than he has. So I'm going to raise it up to 15, and I'm assuming these players right behind me are going to fold, and this player may or may not call. He'll probably call me, but it's not so bad. I don't mind him calling me when I have ace high, which is probably better than what he has. Okay, now right here, let's take a look at what happened. I flopped top pair. However, I did get called by someone in the blinds that I've already said is probably somewhat of a solid player. I'm going to check right here because, frankly, if I bet right here and I get called or if I get raised, I'm in pretty big trouble because this player likely has a pocket pair or a big ace. This player could have anything, and I'm not really too worried at this point. I'm going to check behind and see what the turn brings. Okay, he's checked. He probably doesn't have a whole lot because he's checked twice. Now I can feel pretty confident. I'm going to make a bet of 30 into a 46 pot. It's a little less than a 75% bet. It's about a 70% bet into the pot, and it'll be a little bit less than that. At this point, I'm really not too worried about what the players have, but the point, what I was doing right there is exercising pot control. I knew that I probably had a better hand than this guy the whole time, and I really wasn't too worried about a whole lot of cards that could have hurt me. He probably had 0 pair or maybe 1 pair, so he had very few outs. This player, however, cold called me from the blinds, and that's when someone else raised, I re-raised, and he cold called the bet. if somebody cold calls a bet, typically they have a pretty solid hand, so you have to be careful. I'm gonna fold ace nine right there. A lot of times I would raise to isolate, and I've done that, but I want to maintain somewhat of a tight image for these players. I don't want these players to think I'm out pushing them around too much, when in reality I will be pushing them around, raising and making plays on them and bluffing them in the future. So at the beginning I try to start off without putting too much at risk, without just kind of getting a feel for the table. So I'm going to go through why I used pot control in that last hand. Let's say I'd made top pair on a kind of vulnerable board. There was a flush draw, and there was some straight draws possibly. Let's say somebody made a straight draw or a flush draw there, and I bet. This guy they check to me, and I bet. There's a lot of hands they could be raising me with that are on the draw, something like that, or they could even have a made hand. This guy could have just cold called with ace king or ace queen because he had a good hand, and it's a sign of a good hand when a player calls your raise after somebody else has already raised and you've re-raised them. So I just wasn't so sure about my hand, but I also didn't think that they would try to bluff on the turn if they didn't have it, and that's the important thing. I wasn't worried about being bluffed out of the pot, because they would be just as scared of the ace as I would be, because they probably figure somebody else has the ace if they don't have the ace. So when it got checked to me on the turn, I could safely bet, and it's very unlikely that somebody would have a solid hand and would check 2 times to me. So what I did was I exercised pot control, and that's something you do when you're in a marginal situation. When you're in a situation where you're not sure what you would do if they raise you, and there's a lot of different hands they could be raising you with, exercising pot control or keeping the pot smaller than you normally would think you should is something that can really save you money down the future. So let's say that as you can see from the game right here, this guy just shoved all into a small pot in the last hand, and he's just playing very reckless. So this is the type of guy you're going to make your money off of. This guy to my right here. So exercising pot control. Like let's say the guy I had bet, and the guy over here who had cold called me from the blinds had raised me to like 60 or something. Now, what am I going to do right there? I just have an ace and I have no kicker whatsoever. So if you're going to play this style that I'm advocating, which is being aggressive and isolating players, like the ace-6 raise is not, ace-6 is definitely not a premium hand, but because I had position on the guy and because I figured to have a better hand than he did, I went ahead and made that raise. And I explain all this stuff a little bit more in depth in some of my other videos. This is kind of just a sample, but I'm trying to explain that the style we advocate is being loose, being aggressive, but you're being smart. You're not just messing around gambling. For example, when I had the button when I had that hand, the ace-6 suited hand, I was on the button, which is the most favorable position at the table. When I'm in the most favorable position, I will open up my raising requirements, and I'll be raising a wider range of hands. Hands like ace-6 suited, hands like 9-8 suited, maybe jack-10, like things like that, where I feel that even if I don't have a better hand than that player, my hand is good enough or close enough to being, having as much equity as the opponent's likely hand, that I can outplay them due to the simple fact that I have position. So let's go through an example. Let's say that flop let's say the guy from the blinds, that hand when I raised, just folded, and the guy that I expected to call right here to my right just called. Now, in that case, okay, I'm going to raise right here. I have queen jack offsuit. Actually, you know what? I'm going to fold because I really don't think this guy's going to fold, and I think this could mean strength from this guy right here, or at least a hand that he's going to call with. I don't want to play a hand against 2 players if I'm limping. If I'm raising, if I think 2 players are likely to call, it becomes very difficult for me to play that hand. However, if it's just this guy playing, if this guy hadn't played, I would have raised, because then in that case, playing against 1 player is much easier to do after the flop, and you have a much higher percentage chance of winning. So back to the hand with the ace-6. Now, let's say just the guy to my right had called, and the flop had come down king high or something. Now he checks to me, which is what he's going to do most of the time, and I make a bet of about 2/3 to 3/4 size of the pot. There's going to, at least 50% of the time or so, he's not going to have a pair. 75% of the time or so, he's not going to have a decent pair. He might have like bottom pair, something like that. The majority of the time, he's not going to have a hand that can call a raise. Now, or call a bet, I'm sorry. But now I'm not going to have a hand that much either. Probably about the same percentage that he has a hand. However, I'm the person who showed aggression pre-flop, and I'm the person who will show aggression on the flop, which will give me a chance to win that pot. So you can see by playing a loose and aggressive style late in the position of the hand, you can really start to exploit your opponents who are likely not to have a whole lot and are likely to be playing too many hands themselves. Okay, this guy is raised. I'm I've got one limper right here who I expect to call, and I'm going to call as well, because if I hit a set right here, I can definitely take the player right here's whole stack if he flops any sort of hand. Okay, I haven't made a hand here. He min bets into me. Now, a min bet is a very likely tell for a player to not have very much of a hand. It's a hand that he's kind of scared. He's just trying to control the action. He probably has a hand like a 9 or maybe like 10s or jacks or something. So I'm going to go ahead and raise him up to 18. I think it's likely that he has something reasonable, but not something very good, and that he can't call me. So you can see right there, I just had pocket fours, which is not a very good hand. It was a very mediocre hand on that flop. However, when somebody who raises pre-flop leads into you for a min bet, it's one of two things. Occasionally, it's a very strong hand, but most likely it's a hand that is decent, but he just wants to control the pot size. When it's a weak player leading into you for a smallish bet, he's probably just trying to control the pot size and prevent you from making a bluff against him or something like that. So I kind of recognize that, and that's just a tell that I've noticed over playing literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hands of online poker. So it's kind of one of the things that we go into in our videos. So I'm going to discuss these details and tips in future videos at cardplayer.com. For now, I'm going to call that a video here, but I recommend you guys check out CardRunners.com. We have a free video up on our website, as well as videos for individual sale, and also I recommend the full membership, because that is the best value. We have over 300 videos